Val Kilmer was more than just a movie star. He was an icon, a mysterious force in Hollywood, a chameleon of the screen. So when news broke on April 1st, 2025, that he had passed away, fans were stunned. Not just shocked, devastated. Most people thought he was in the clear. After all, he'd survived throat cancer, returned triumphantly as Iceman in Top Gun, Maverick, and even found a way to recreate his voice using artificial intelligence. He had beaten the odds, right? But what the public didn't see was what had been happening quietly behind the scenes. The cause of death was pneumonia, but it wasn't that simple. Val had been battling complications from his tracheotomy for years. Breathing was difficult. Speaking was worse. And while he never publicly complained, those closest to him knew. He was struggling. He kept painting. He kept writing. He even had new projects in the works. But in private, his condition had taken a sharp turn. He was in and out of hospitals. And yet, not once did he ask fans for pity. Instead, he focused on legacy, on finishing what he started. His passing wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, peaceful. But that's what made it hit even harder. Because Val Kilmer had always seemed untouchable. Even when he was sick, he looked forward. When his voice was taken, he found a new one. And when Hollywood forgot him, he made them remember. But the story of his death is only part of what makes Val Kilmer unforgettable. Because to understand what we lost, we first need to remember who he really was. And that's where the real story begins. Before the illness, before the silence, Val Kilmer was everywhere. And not just in movies. He was the movie. Whether it was the smirking, too cool for you fighter pilot in Top Gun, the possessed genius in The Doors, or the Southern gunslinger in Tombstone, Kilmer didn't just play characters, he became them. But there was always something different about him. While other stars chased fame, Kilmer pulled away from it. In a town obsessed with being seen, he was the mystery everyone couldn't stop looking at. He studied at Juilliard. He wrote plays. He turned down huge roles that made other actors household names. He said no to Dirty Dancing, Blue Velvet, even the chance to work with Scorsese, not because he didn't want success, but because he didn't care about playing it safe. He only wanted the work to matter. That mindset made him a legend and a liability. On the set of The Island of Dr. Moreau, things reportedly got out of control. Directors called him difficult. Studios got cold feet. Even Batman Forever, one of his biggest hits, ended with him walking away from the franchise, while it was still printing money. But here's the twist. Kilmer didn't crash because of ego. He chose to walk away. While other actors were carefully managing their public image, Val was writing poetry. While they were attending parties, he was studying Mark Twain. He didn't care if you understood him. As long as you felt something when you watched him on screen, he was, as one director put it, brilliant, stubborn, and completely unforgettable. But there was something else going on behind the roles and the headlines. Something even the tabloids missed. Because the cracks in the facade had started forming early, long before the diagnosis. From the outside, Val Kilmer was everything Hollywood wanted. A-list looks, talent for days, and roles that made history. But behind the fame was a man who never quite fit the mold. Because while everyone saw the movie star, few ever understood the artist. Kilmer was raised in a strict Christian Science household, a belief system that often discouraged medical intervention. That spiritual foundation shaped his thinking for life, and would later play a haunting role in his approach to illness. But even as a young man, there were signs he didn't view the world the way others did. He obsessed over the roles he took, not for fame, but for authenticity. When he was cast as Jim Morrison in The Doors, he didn't just learn the lyrics, he lived them. He sang the songs himself, dressed like Morrison Offset, and reportedly even hallucinated conversations with the dead rock star. Directors were blown away. So were audiences, but friends worried. Was it brilliance or something darker? He wrote poetry, raw, romantic, sometimes incoherent. He'd spend nights alone at his New Mexico ranch, painting or writing screenplays that would never be made. He turned down blockbuster scripts because they didn't feel true. One role was too easy, another too fake. Even after playing Batman, He walked away, not because the suit was uncomfortable, but because the role lacked soul. And slowly, Hollywood started to pull away. By the mid-2000s, he was slipping off the A-list. He was still working, still brilliant, but no longer the center of attention. Rumors swirled. He was too intense, too weird, too hard to direct. What they didn't see was a man wrestling with himself, his faith, his art, and his place in a business built on illusion. But while the spotlight faded, something far more serious was creeping in behind the scenes. And by the time the world noticed, it was almost too late. In 2014, something changed. Val Kilmer began canceling appearances. He looked thinner, quieter, withdrawn. Fans speculated, but he said nothing. Then came the whispers, throat cancer. But Kilmer denied it. Publicly, he claimed it was just a minor issue. Privately, he was suffocating, literally. His breathing was strained, his voice disappearing. The truth? He had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of throat cancer. But because of his Christian Science beliefs, he delayed conventional treatment. He believed in healing through prayer, not chemotherapy. That decision nearly killed him. In early 2015, Kilmer collapsed in his Los Angeles home, coughing blood. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors found a massive tumor blocking his airway. Surgery followed, then another, then a tracheotomy. The man who once delivered some of Hollywood's most iconic lines could barely whisper. His voice, his most powerful tool, was gone. But Kilmer wasn't ready to surrender. He kept the tracheostomy tube. He continued writing, even when speaking was impossible. He told fans he was healing, and technically, he eventually entered remission. But the price was permanent. He would never speak normally again. Still, he refused to show weakness. In public, he wore scarves and smiled for photos. But behind closed doors, he struggled with every breath. Close friends like Cher stepped in, even hosting him during recovery. She later recalled finding him gasping for air, covered in blood, yet still cracking jokes. That was Val, defiant, even at rock bottom. For years, he stayed silent about the truth, not just because of pride, but because he didn't want to be pitted. But silence couldn't hide the scars. When fans finally saw him again, many were shocked by what they saw. Yet no one expected what he would do next. Not even Hollywood. Most actors would have vanished. After losing their voice, their health, and their place in Hollywood, they'd quietly disappear. But Val Kilmer? He did the opposite. He redefined what it meant to make a comeback. First, he turned inward. Kilmer began channeling his energy into poetry and painting, two passions he'd always kept private. His artwork was strange, emotional, and often self-referential. Portraits of himself as Doc Holliday, abstract takes on Morrison, even surreal images of Batman. Fans started seeing pieces pop up on Instagram, not just as art, but as a cry from someone still fighting. Then came Val, a documentary made from decades of his own home videos. It premiered in 2021 and stunned viewers, not just because of the footage, but because of the vulnerability. Kilmer let audiences see everything. The early auditions, the blockbuster days, the painful aftermath of cancer. His son Jack narrated the film, stepping in where Kilmer's damaged voice couldn't. Critics called it haunting, beautiful, and heartbreaking. A love letter to art, survival, and regret. But the moment that shocked everyone came in 2022. Top Gun, Maverick. After years of silence, Kilmer returned as Iceman. Not a gimmick, not a cameo. A real, emotionally grounded moment between two legends. Tom Cruise reportedly insisted Val be part of the sequel, no matter the cost. And when the time came, Kilmer's voice was digitally recreated using AI, pieced together from old recordings. One line, just one, but it was everything. Fans cried. Cruise cried. Even hardened critics admitted that single scene stole the movie. Kilmer, once written off as too broken to return, had reclaimed his place in the spotlight. Not with sound, but with soul. But behind that powerful return, something was quietly unraveling. Because the truth was, Kilmer's body was failing, even as his legacy was rising. It happened quietly, just like he lived in those final years. On April 1st, 2025, Val Kilmer passed away in a Los Angeles hospital. The official cause? Complications from pneumonia. But it was far more than a simple infection. The damage left behind by years of cancer treatment, the tracheotomy, and chronic respiratory failure had taken their toll. His body, once strong enough to transform into action heroes and rock icons, could no longer keep up. His immune system was weakened. Breathing had become a battle. And despite being in remission, the aftershocks of his illness never really left him. To most of the world, it felt sudden. Just 3 years earlier, he had lit up screens in Top Gun, Maverick, a moment that felt like a resurrection. He was painting, he was writing, he was even teasing new projects. But those closest to him knew the truth. He had been quietly preparing for this moment. On April 7th, he was cremated in a private ceremony attended by family and a few close friends. But the tributes that followed were anything but quiet. Tom Cruise paused a presentation at CinemaCon to hold a moment of silence for his longtime friend. Cher posted a photo of them in better days, calling him a beautiful soul. Directors from Oliver Stone to Ron Howard shared stories of his brilliance, his intensity, and how he always gave more than what was asked. Fans flooded social media, quoting lines from Tombstone and Heat, sharing memories, favorite scenes, and heartbreak. One post summed it up perfectly. He didn't just act. He burned through the screen. Even in death, Val Kilmer remained an enigma. A man who refused to be ordinary. A star who never faded. He just evolved. But there was still one question no one could quite answer. What was it all really for? Val Kilmer's journey wasn't just about fame or film. It was about identity. About holding on to something real in a world that demands performance. He lost his voice, but he never lost his message. In his final years, when speaking was nearly impossible, Kilmer still found ways to express himself. Through brush strokes, through handwritten poetry, through unfinished scripts no one else could quite understand, and through his children, especially Jack, who helped him tell his story when he physically couldn't. He refused to be defined by illness. He refused to be remembered for pity. Instead, he kept creating, kept fighting, and most importantly, he kept feeling, because Val Kilmer wasn't interested in surface. He chased meaning. He sought soul. Hollywood often forgets people like that, but Kilmer made sure he couldn't be erased. Even now, you'll see his name pop up in conversations about underrated actors, comeback legends, and misunderstood geniuses. And there's a reason for that. He lived with the kind of defiance most people only dream of. He turned his suffering into art. He turned rejection into poetry. And in the end, he turned silence into something louder than words. His career wasn't perfect. His life wasn't easy. But that's what made it real. That's what made it his. As one fan wrote the day he died, Val Kilmer taught me that you can lose everything and still leave something behind that lasts forever. That's the mark of an artist. Not perfection, not applause, but impact. And if you listen closely, in the way he tilted his head as Holiday, in the pause before Iceman spoke, in the rough scratch of his post-surgery whisper, you'll hear it. The voice of a man who refused to disappear. The soul of a legend who never really left. Val Kilmer's death brought something into sharp focus. Just how misunderstood he really was. He had one of the most fascinating careers in Hollywood. Blockbusters, biopics, cult classics, and yet, he never won an Oscar. Never even got nominated. How? Was it because he didn't play the game? Because he challenged directors? Because he refused to be the smiling, polished product Hollywood prefers? It's hard to say. But one thing is clear. Val Kilmer wasn't just an actor. He was a force, a disruptor, someone who treated every role like a mission. And that intensity? It scared people. He wasn't there to entertain. He was there to transform. Even now, people argue over who he really was. Some say he was too difficult, too prideful. Others say he was a misunderstood genius. One who sacrificed mainstream fame for artistic truth. Maybe both are true, but what's undeniable is the impact. His Doc Holliday in Tombstone became one of the most quoted roles in film history. His performance as Jim Morrison blurred the line between actor and subject. And his final act, returning from the brink of silence in Top Gun, Maverick, felt like a farewell letter from a man who had nothing left to prove. Then there's Val, the documentary, raw, intimate, and at times painful to watch. It gave fans a window into the heart of a man who had spent most of his life behind masks. For many, it was the first time they truly saw him. Now, months after his passing, people are watching his films again, re-listening to old interviews, reading his memoir, and discovering a man who, even when stripped of his voice, never stopped speaking through his work. Because in the end, Val Kilmer didn't just leave behind a filmography. He left behind a message that the soul of an artist doesn't fade, it echoes.